I'm joined right now by Senator Alex Padilla. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. First question, how are you? We all watched the video. We saw you taken to the floor by those agents. How are you doing?
Yeah, look, I'm okay. I've been on the phone off and on with kids, right? Because my kids, word travels fast in this day and age with technology, make sure they're okay. But I think most importantly is the outrage that I hope people feel. If this can happen to a United States Senator for having the audacity to ask a question of the Secretary of Homeland Security, the same questions for and requests for information that we've had, not just the last sort of week or so of the activity in Los Angeles, but since the beginning of the administration, then just imagine what can happen to anybody in the country for that matter.
We heard from you briefly at the press conference after you came outside of the federal building in Westwood. We've heard more extensively from Secretary Noem in the Department of Homeland Security, and I want to just tell you a little bit, because I'm sure this has been a whirlwind, about what they've been saying. Secretary Noem said that you, quote, lunged towards her at this press conference. The Department of Homeland Security said the Secret Service believed that you were an attacker. And the Department of Homeland Security called this political theater. What's your response and what's your version of what happened?
Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. It's a lie, but par for the course for this administration, right? So here's the stage. Look, I was in the federal building here in Los Angeles for a scheduled briefing. Just as when my colleagues and I had to go all the way to Guantanamo Bay to begin to get information about that facility being used as a detention facility, they've been non-responsive to requests for information. And so I had scheduled, they approved, a briefing with representatives of the Northern Command in that federal building. We were there prior to the 10:30 original appointment date when we caught wind that Secretary of Homeland Security is going to be down the hall at a press conference. And our briefing was now delayed because of that press conference. So since the secretary has been non-responsive, I figured let me go over and listen to what she has to say. Maybe we can glean some information here.
So let me make sure I understand that. Go ahead.
So the whole time, right? We're the whole time being escorted in this federal building by somebody from the National Guard, somebody from the FBI. I've gone through screening. This is a federal building. And so tell them, let's go listen to the press conference. They escort me over to that room. And I'm sitting in the back of the room behind the cameras, behind the reporters, listening. And at one point, it was just too much to take. Not the first, but the second attack on the political leadership of California and this notion that Donald Trump and Kristi Noem had to come in and rescue the people of Los Angeles from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. It was too much. And so I spoke up. I introduced myself and said I had a question. Look, they said I wasn't wearing my pin. My polo says United States Senate. There was no threat. There was no lunging. I raised my voice to ask a question, and it took, maybe half a second before multiple agents were on me.
The video clearly shows, and you can hear on the audio, that you identify yourself as Senator Padilla. She said you barged into the room, or you basically broke into the room. I'm paraphrasing here. Just set the record straight on that.
Yeah, no, I didn't barge into the room. As I mentioned, I was in a different conference room, a couple doors down the hall. I let it be known I'd like to go listen to the press conference. The folks that were escorting me in the building walked me over. I didn't even open the door. The door was open for me. And I spent a few minutes in the back of the room just listening in until the rhetoric, the political rhetoric, got to be too much to take. So I spoke up.
Have you seen the video yet? Well, you can look here, Senator. Have you actually watched it yourself? When you watch this, and let's go through this together. Describe to me what you're seeing. What's happening here?
Yeah, again, well, multiple people forcibly removing from the room. I know I was trying to do two things at once, try to get my question out while trying not to lose my balance. They first asked me to, get down on my knees. Like, growing up where I grew up, you know what happens if you don't obey law enforcement. And so I began to go on my knees to the extent that they would let me, because they were literally handling me at the same time. And it went from getting on their knees to flat on the floor, which I tried, but wasn't able to easily because of the folks handling me. They put handcuffs on me. So yes, I was handcuffed.
These are FBI agents. Did they tell you who they were?
They wouldn't identify themselves, and I kept repeatedly asking themselves, why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. Then they get me back up on my feet, and we start walking. Don't tell me where we're going.
You were handcuffed at this point?
Absolutely. Am I being led back outside? I don't know. Am I being taken to a cell? I don't know. They were non-communicative until somebody from, I'm sure, Secretary Noem's team figured out I was who I said I was, and finally said, let him go.
So they let you go. They took the handcuffs off. What happened next? There were reports that you met with Secretary Noem for 15 minutes after the press conference was over.
So this is a little surreal. So they took the handcuffs off. The person that came over said, well, if you'd like to meet with the secretary, you can do so after the press conference is over. Sure, I've been dying to get information from the department for months. I'll take this opportunity and see what I can glean. Then I was asked, but the other briefing that you're here for, the previously scheduled briefing, would you still like that briefing? Of course, that's why we came. That one never happened because the representatives from Northern Command left and again, didn't give us an excuse, so hoped for another opportunity to learn from them. Like, again, what's the mission of the National Guard here? What training have what's normally state National Guard, now federalized National Guard service women and men, if they're going to be out in communities, if they're going to be interfacing with civilians? This is not a normal job for them. And by the way, they're being taken away from other critical missions in the state of California to do this function. Now we hear the Marines are coming. For what purpose? What's the mission? What type of training preparation have they had?
Did you get answers to any of these questions?
None. And so, again, did have an opportunity to sit with the Secretary Noem for a few minutes. You know, you think she might have started the meeting with an apology of what happened. Of course not. And so I began to ask the question I was trying to ask in the press conference. For all the touting of the Trump administration of going after violent criminals, I told her, there's no disagreement there. If that's all you were doing, there would be no debate, there would be no discussion. But what's happening in reality is far different than that, because we hear story after story after story of non-violent migrants who, many are working in very essential jobs for our economy, being rounded up. Right, the cruelty with which they're doing this, the increased cruelty with which they're doing this, escalating here in Los Angeles over the course of the last week. You don't need flashbangs, you know, when you're trying to target one person. National Guard over, you know, not at the request of a governor. It hasn't happened since 1965. And so, of course, they're instigating, trying to create the response and a reaction from community, and we'll point to anything to further escalate the situation. It's wrong and it's counterproductive. I'm still processing what happened to me, but to the extent that we have shed more light on what they're doing and how they're doing it, the public deserves to be aware. To suggest that they have to come into Los Angeles to restore order. Look, Jacob, you know Los Angeles. It's a big, spread out city. The images that we've seen over the course of the last week of some vandalism, some violence, etc., that's wrong, and I denounce it, but it's very small and very contained in a big metropolis of the Los Angeles area. So the National Guard was not necessary, but folks have responded to that. It's the Trump administration continuing to escalate. A couple of days ago, he's saying that things are better now that the National Guard has shown up. If things were better, why is he now considering sending in the Marines? They're continuing to escalate. It doesn't have to be this way.
Can you clarify for us, Senator Padilla, you were there to have this meeting with the Northern Command in charge of some of the troops that are on the ground here in Los Angeles. Did you ultimately have that meeting, and did you ultimately get any answers from Northern Command about, for instance, there's this hearing in the courts today, the state of California is suing the administration over the deployment of the troops to California. Did you get any indication one way or another whether Northern Command, the military, would respect the outcome of what Judge Breyer says in this court case today?
Well, that was one of the questions I had for them. But unfortunately, the briefing never happened, and so we never got an answer to that question.
Your colleagues are marching to the office of Leader Thune to demonstrate on your behalf, to call for justice for what happened to you. But those are your Democratic colleagues. Have you heard anything from a single Republican member of the U.S. Senate or the House about what happened to you?
Haven't spoken to any of my Republican colleagues yet. I will say there's two that at least sent a text message saying that they denounced what happened, checking to see if I'm okay. Senator Sheehy from Montana, Senator Curtis from Utah. But the point is this: if my colleagues are now at Leader Thune's office, and this is a question I've been asking all my Republican colleagues since the beginning of Trump's term, when is enough enough? The audacity for how this administration has gone after their political agenda. When I hear behind closed doors, well, once he gets, crosses a certain line, then we're going to start to rein him in. But they keep saying yes to every ask he makes, every nominee he puts forward. When is enough enough? When they feel no repercussions for putting a United States senator in handcuffs for the audacity to ask a question and to speak up for fundamental rights and due process. When is enough enough?
You became emotional when you came outside and spoke after this happened to you. And I want to make sure that I tell everybody specifically what it was that you were talking about when you teared up. You talked about farmers and cooks and day laborers. You spoke in Spanish. I've heard you often speak about your father, who was a short order cook, and your mother, who cleaned homes. You grew up here in the Northeast San Fernando Valley in a neighborhood called Pacoima. You played baseball in high school, you went to MIT, and you came back and you became the leader of the city council, the youngest ever, first Latino. You went to the state senate, you became the Secretary of State of California, and now you're the senior senator from California. But why is it that? Why is it farmers and cooks and day laborers that put tears in your eyes?
Because I understand their plight. I understand their struggle. I understand their sacrifice to just find the American dream, a good opportunity, maybe a good job, the ability to raise a family and have the next generation have it a little bit better than you did. And so for all the talk about immigration, the misinformation, disinformation about invasions and insurrections, it's all BS coming from Trump. As I said before, if all they were going to do is target violent, dangerous criminals, true threats to our national security, that'd be one thing. Nobody has a disagreement there. But what's happening in practice is so many, yes, maybe undocumented immigrants, but who are otherwise law-abiding, peaceful, and hardworking. To think this administration changed policy for federal agents to enter schools, houses of worship, let alone workplaces. If immigrants are that bad, why is that where you're looking for them? And as I take a step back and take a deep breath, I get to remind everybody, this is the state of California. Not only the most populous state in the nation, the most diverse state in the nation, home to more immigrants than any state in the nation. Mostly documented immigrants, legal immigrants, but yeah, there's a good number of undocumented immigrants. But this is also California, that's the largest economy of any state in the nation, fourth largest economy in the world. It's not despite the immigrant population, it's because of the contributions of so many immigrants as a workforce, as consumers, as entrepreneurs. If your interest is in improving safety of communities, facilitating thriving communities and economic growth, this is something to embrace, not to attack. But sadly, Donald Trump has had it since the first time he came down the escalator at Trump Tower before the 2016 election.
Your mom and your dad were both immigrants from Mexico. When you look at the protesters on the streets that are standing up to, they started on Friday against the ICE raids. Now they're out there against the National Guard and against the Marines coming to the streets. Do you see yourself, do you see your mom and dad and the protesters that are out there pushing back against this administration?
Yeah, I see not just families like mine, but families like most of the families that I grew up with. All right, and that was me back in 2006 during one of the many waves of a push for the modernization of our immigration laws. That was me in 1994, fresh home from college when we had Proposition 187 on the ballot here in California, a precursor to a lot of the Trump anti-immigrant rhetoric when then Governor Pete Wilson, down in the polls, up for re-election, chose to play that immigrant scapegoating card. It was that measure that caused people like my parents, who had been here literally for decades, with no sense of urgency to naturalize and become citizens, to finally do so that they could register and vote, realizing that while their past may be in another country, they were firmly established here, their future was here, and they ought to assimilate completely. And it was that measure that got me and so many other people in my generation finally involved in the political process. I think California, as a result, is much different today than it was in 1994. And we're proudly doing our part to lead not just on immigrant rights issues, but access to healthcare issues, quality of education issues, tackling climate change, protecting reproductive rights in marriage equality, and so much more. and we're the fourth largest economy in the world. Again, this is a model, a recipe, a playbook for other states, if not the country, to follow, not fear.
Both Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom, who have stood up on your behalf, spoken out on your behalf in the wake of this happening to you, have talked about how they believe that this is in some form a test case for the Trump administration to do this in other places, in other cities, to ignore the will of the people and the democracy, the democratically elected representatives of the United States government. You share that feeling?
Absolutely. And we've been saying so almost on a daily basis since the escalation, the Trump escalation of last weekend, whether it's press events, whether it's in committee, whether it's in floor speeches in the Senate. Because if you look at how the administration has gone about trying to justify, unacceptably in my opinion, but trying to justify the federalization of the National Guard, the deployment of the National Guard over the wishes of, forget the governor and the mayor for a second, the sheriff of Los Angeles County and the chief of police of Los Angeles City. The language that they've used, the mechanisms they use are not Los Angeles specific, and they're not California specific. And if they're allowed to do this in Los Angeles, they can and they will do this in any corner of the country.
You made it a point to encourage people to protest this Saturday outside of the federal building. Peacefully. Why did you, I mean, it was the last thing that you said after you came out. You encouraged people to go out and take to the streets as part of these large-scale rallies that have been playing out in Los Angeles on the streets, but also on Saturday scheduled across the nation. Why did you make that your final thought and parting words from the federal building today? Because,
look, I was at the Emergency Operations Center last night getting the latest brief from Chief McDonald and other members of the city family. And from what I've heard from county officials, state officials, and now local officials, things seem to be quieting somewhat during the course of this week, but the chatter that's out there is people are getting ready for a number of protest events this weekend that coincide with not just the anniversary of the Army, but this vanity parade in Washington, D.C. And so First Amendment rights are a beautiful thing, and they need to be utilized. There's a lot of passion out there in some quarters, a lot of fear and anxiety in other quarters, a lot of outrage in other quarters. It's very patriotic to channel that and to speak up and to demonstrate. Let's do it peacefully, because that is our right, and that's how maybe we shift public opinion, but we can't cower. That's what Donald Trump, he wants us to stay quiet and just stay home.
I know you spend your weekends here in Los Angeles. You're going to be out there this weekend on Saturday?
We'll see, because given the developments of today, we'll see how folks are feeling.
And physically, just want to, before we go, are you doing okay? Are you hurting? How are you feeling?
I think the adrenaline is still rushing right now, so we may not know till tomorrow.
Senator Alex Padilla, thank you so much for joining us here.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.